Hey guys, what's up? It's Samantha, and today I am finally getting caught up on my what I've read videos. I decided to do this as a face-to-face video instead of talking over my monthly spread, mostly because I read 22 books in February. Yes, you heard me right, 22 books. Part of that is that I read several graphic novels, and graphic novels are just way easier to fly through than regular books, but yeah, I want to go ahead and get started, and I do have my phone with my Goodreads open because there is no way that I could literally remember all of these books, even if I tried. Okay, so I'm going to talk about series. Like, if I read the whole series in the month, I'm just going to talk about them both at the same time. So the first book that I read this month was Renegades by Marissa, and I also read the sequel, Archenemies. And I'm not a huge fan of this series. I know a lot of people really love it, but they're just so long. Like, someone needs to edit these books. I feel like this is a thing that happens with authors when they have a really successful series, is that the publisher just lets them write whatever they want and doesn't edit anymore. So there could be like a really good core story or some really interesting characters or concepts, but then it just goes on for too long, or there's unnecessary plot lines, there's unnecessary, just like huge chunks of the book, and that's what I felt like with Renegades. Like, there was a point in the book that would have made an excellent ending point that would have cut the book by about a third, like about 2/3 of the way through the book. Yeah. And it was, so I gave this one a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I listened to the audiobook, which I listened to all of the Cinder books, the Lunar Chronicles, that's what they were called, on audiobook too. I really like Rebecca Soler as a reader, but it dragged. It took me, normally I finish an audiobook pretty quickly. It took me almost 2 weeks to finish Renegades, if that gives you any idea. Like, it was just, it kind of felt like a slog. But there were some really interesting characters and interesting concepts that I was like, okay, well, it's worth reading. Archenemies. And then I kind of felt the same way about Archenemies. I gave this a 2.5 again for the same reasons. It was so long. It could have moved at a much faster pace. Yeah, like, basically in Archenemies, not much happens until the end, and then like stuff starts happening. But it was just really, really, that's like that was my takeaway from the book, was how painfully slow it was. And I was just like, is this ever gonna end? Like, this is way too long. Why? I could have taken a red pen to like a third of this, and had a tighter, more action-packed, because it's a book about superheroes. It should be fast-paced and action-packed, and it just didn't feel that way. So yeah, then the next book I read in February was The Way You Make Me Feel by Maureen, and I really enjoyed this book. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and just for, I don't give 5 stars to a whole lot of things. I give a lot of books. Like, I can like a book and still give it, like, for me a 3.5 means like above average. So like a 2.5 for me is like completely average, run-of-the-mill, like nothing to write home about, but like not a terrible book. So 3.5 for like a contemporary romance. It was a really cute, fun read. It was like a rom-com in a book. The main character is kind of a total jerk face, but I love it. Like, she ends up growing and developing as a character. I feel like that's something that people forget, is characters are allowed to be terrible people. Like, every character doesn't have to be a perfect beacon of loveliness. But so basically this book follows our main character, whose name I cannot for the life of me remember because I don't ever remember character names, but basically she is the class clown. She's sort of a slacker, and she doesn't take anything seriously, and she like sets the school on fire on prom night. I think that's what she does. There's something with fire, but she causes a lot of damage. She gets in huge trouble, and her dad decides that to pay back the school for the damage she's caused, she has to work on her dad's Korean Brazilian fusion food truck. And so she ends up working on this food truck with her arch enemy who is also like dragged into this whole mess at the school and is very upset about it. And so the two of them are working to pay off the damages, and it's sort of a story of their growth and development, and there's a cute boy, and it's just really great to see like books about like normal everyday life where like characters just happen to be diverse. Like it's just normal that these characters are of different, like the main character is Korean but her parents are from Brazil, so she speaks Portuguese instead of like Korean, which is really interesting. I really enjoyed this book quite a bit, and it's a super fun, easy read, like a great glass of wine, bowl of popcorn, read in your pajamas on a Friday night kind of book, which is exactly how I read this. The next book I read was On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden, which was a graphic novel, and this I gave a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I might say this was a 2. I did not like this book very much. So yeah, I'm gonna say it's a 2. On further, sometimes I have to like sit with a book for a while and then I think about it and I'm like, no, like I didn't like that. This was a graphic novel. It's like a set in space. It's about a crew of all women that goes into these like places out in space and does like all the renovations to restore, like a restoration team kind of thing. And there's only women in this universe. There's no men, which is never explained. Yet there's only women, but there's a non-binary character. And I was like, how can there be a non-binary character in this universe if there's no binary? They're only women. I was just confused by that. Like, I liked that there was representation, but like it just didn't make sense. I don't know. There were a lot of things about this world that just didn't make sense. And the actual like imagery, the graphic part of the graphic novel wasn't very good in my opinion. You couldn't tell the difference. Like, I found myself baffled so many times. Every character looked the exact same and I could not tell. Like, there were times I'd be like, why is this person kissing this other person? Like, what happened? Like, what did I miss? Like, I'd be going back and then I'd like realize, oh, this is this other character, but no one had glasses. Like, things weren't in different colors. Everyone looked the exact same. And I seriously like spent half the time reading this book trying to figure out who the heck was talking. It's a cool concept. There were some like, again, like core concepts that I was like, this could have been really, really cool. I just didn't feel like the execution was well done. So, there's better graphic novels out there that explore space and stuff, like Saga. Just read Saga. Just skip this book. I feel like it only got praise because of the diversity and the representation of different, like, everyone's a lesbian in the story because there's only women. So every single character only dates women because there's only women, and then there's a non-binary character. So like, that's an interesting concept, but like, that on its own doesn't make a book good for me. Like, something can still do representation well and like not be a book I like. So this does representation well, but I don't like the book. So the next book I read in February was Witchborne by Nicholas Bowling, which I gave a 2 stars. I had a streak of just bad books. In February, there were a lot of 2 stars given. So this is a historical fantasy novel that takes place in Elizabethan era England, and I did not really, it was so boring. Like, I went into it thinking it was going to be like witchy and dark, like based on the blurb on the inside. It was short. It was only about 300 pages. I was like, yes, like a quick read. It read like middle grade. I was so confused about why we put it in teen, and the characters are like 14, but it felt like a middle grade book. It didn't feel like a teen book, and it was very, very boring. And it was more about the historical stuff. Like, there were some fantasy elements, but they were few and far between, and it was just depressing. And there's better historical fiction from that era, like read Crispin, was it Crispin? The Cross of Lead or whatever by Avi. That is a much better middle grade historical fiction thing. So read that, don't read this. And then the next book I listened to the audiobook for, and this was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I think I'm saying her name right. And I gave this a 4 stars. I really, really liked this, and I would really recommend, because it's spoken word poetry, so I would recommend listening to the audiobook. It's under 4 hours long, and I listen on like times 1.75 or times 2. So I listened to this all in one evening after work, and I really enjoyed it. It's really good. The reason that this was not a 5-star book for me, because this was going to be a 5-star, is I found the ending to be just a little bit too neat and tidy. It felt like in real life situations that are portrayed in the book would not have that outcome, but the poetry is beautiful and the message is gorgeous, and it's just, there's a reason it was the Prince winner. But the next book I read was Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, which is actually the first time I've ever read this book, which I don't know why it took me this long to read it. So I listened to this. I listened to it all in one day, and I really, really enjoyed it. I liked everything about it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It's a great contemporary romance, contemporary like book about friendship sort of thing, and I liked it. That's, you know, I don't have too much to say about it. Like, everyone's read Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda before. And then I also read Leah on the Offbeat, which I did not like. It felt like I was reading retconned fan fiction of Simon, because I had just read Simon and I started Leah the next day, and I was like, she just like went back and like retconned all these things that happened in Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda and like changed all these characters. And also Leah was incredibly unlikable, but she never gets better. Like, she's very flawed, but she never learns, and she's just kind of a terrible human being, and being inside of her head felt like a chore to me. So I would not recommend. I would recommend reading Simon. I would recommend skipping Leah, because it just reads like it really does read like fan fiction of Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda. So I gave that a 2-star review. The next book that I read, I read 2 graphic novels next, were The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wang, which was adorable, and it's a super fast read. It's about this girl who makes these incredible like high fashion dresses, and she's really talented, and there is a prince who likes to dress up in women's clothes, but it's just about like accepting like something outside of gender norms, and it's really adorable watching their relationship grow. It was a super cute story. The illustrations were beautiful. The clothing was amazing, because it's a book about dresses and the girl who makes them and the boy who wears them. I don't know, it was really cute. The next book I read is Sleepless by Sarah Vaughan, and I think there's a couple of other authors, Sarah Vaughan and Lila Del Duca. Sleepless is amazing. It's this gorgeous fantasy, historical, like medieval setting. So if you're like a fan of Game of Thrones, or you like books with like a lot of political court intrigue, that sort of thing going on, you absolutely have to read this. I picked it up while I was on the reference desk out of boredom, because it was sitting on our new shelf, and I was like, holy crap, how have I been missing this? Like, it was a 5-star, easy 5-star for me, and I'm so sad it's only 2 volumes. Like, I want to read so much more in this world, and there isn't more in this world, and I'm like, how can you do this to me? Like, they created this amazing world, and there's only 2 volumes. So basically we follow a princess who has a bodyguard who has pledged himself to like protect her, and in this world, one of the kind of the only remnant of magic or fantasy is that these like soldiers can pledge themselves to be sleepless, so they never sleep, and then as they get older they get to a certain point where they start drifting, and then they fall asleep and like sleep all of the sleep that they missed earlier in their life before they die, and they never know when they're going to start drifting. But basically this guy is sleepless, but instead of pledging himself to the king, he pledged himself directly to the king's illegitimate daughter, and he is protecting her, and then the king dies, and there is a new king, and there's just political, like, craziness, and murder attempts, and the relationship between, like, the guard and the princess is just adorable, and you have to read it. You have to, like, go read it right now. You will not regret reading this, especially if you are a fan of fantasy or, like, that kind of, like, medieval fantasy sort of stuff. And even if not, even if you just like fantasy and pretty pictures, it's so cute and worth the read. And then the, oh boy, I feel like I'm gonna need to stretch to talk about this one, because I finally read the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. Okay, so I listened to all three of these, which, like, okay, so if you guys don't know, Laini Taylor, Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares are, like, my favorite books of all time. I have both of them turned out on my shelf because that's how much I love them. Yeah, I'm obsessed with those books, and I have been, like, I didn't realize that these books take place in the same multiverse as Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares. And Laini Taylor's writing is incredibly lyrical. She's just such a beautiful writer, and I think that's why, like, I could, seriously, she could write an 800-page book about what you eat for breakfast, and I would read it. So the first one, I gave a 3.5 to, which was the, I don't know where it is. It's down there. Daughter of Smoke and Bone. I gave a 3.5. So there were elements of it, like, I could see, like, okay, this is Laini Taylor figuring out how to be Laini Taylor. The reason I gave it 3.5 is there's just, like, there's an insta-love between the main character, like, the two main characters that are just, like, it was a level I've never seen before. It was just a little bizarre, and I was like, okay. So basically this series, how do you describe this series? Like, I read it and, like, I know what happened, but I'm like, I don't really know how to describe it. So it's a fantasy world, a fantasy novel that takes place between two adjoining worlds, Earth, and then there's portals into another world that the name I'm blanking on the name of this world. I can't remember, but basically on this second planet there are chimera who are sort of like an angels and demons sort of thing. So there's seraphim, right? I think it's seraphim. Yeah. And chimera who are like the demons, and they have been fighting and warring, and there are portals between Earth and this other place, and our main character helps collect like does errands and collects teeth for a chimera who uses the teeth to reconstruct bodies of fallen soldiers, and, like, they put their souls back into these new bodies, and it's, like, this insane, like, the fantasy element of this, like, I love it. I love everything. Her world building is so in-depth and whatever. Like, seriously, the only reason this was 3.5 stars is because the insta-love is just, like, there's no chill. And then the second book in this series was, I can never remember the order of anything, Days of Blood and Starlight, which takes place almost entirely in a Casbah in Morocco, which was like, I was totally okay with it. So I liked this one more because it focuses a lot on, like, Mick and Susanna. They end up at the Casbah with, what's her face? That's, like, so bad I can't even remember the main character's name. I'm just like, Mick and Susanna. Carew. How could I forget Carew? Carew and Akiva. Those are, like, our romantic pairing. I do think Mick and Susanna are my favorite characters in this series. But the romance, like, almost completely disappears in this one, which I was totally okay with. So it's focused more on the world building and the fantastical elements and understanding, like, the history of these groups and, like, the political crap and the wars and everything. The third book is Dreams of Gods and Monsters, which is, like, okay, so if you've read Muse of Nightmares, then you know that, like, Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares, like, you think it's about one thing, and then you get like halfway through Muse of Nightmares and she's like, just kidding, this is actually about something completely different, and all the stuff that you thought was super important doesn't matter anymore because like interdimensional space travel, and I'm like, that's basically what happens here. And if I had read this series before Muse of Nightmares, I would have been like, oh, this is probably gonna happen halfway through. But these series are connected and it's amazing, and like no one from, like if I don't get a crossover between these two series, I am going to lose my mind. Like I need there to be more series taking place, like it's the concept that there's like a bunch of worlds like connected to each other by portals, and I'm just like, I could fangirl about these books. Like I feel like I'm not even telling you what they're about. Like this is just like my, like I need to go back and reread all of them again to like really wrap my mind around everything that was going on, because there were parts of, especially in the second one, for like the first 20%, I was like, wait, like is someone dead? Like it just, none of it, I like didn't know what was going on, and I was like, oh, now I know what's going on, and I don't know. Okay, so now that I'm done fangirling about Daughter of Smoke and Bone, which I will say, Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares are better than this series, but by the time we got to the third book, I was like, oh, this is the Laini Taylor I know and love. Like, this is the woman who would go on to write Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares. Like, I feel like she figures out how to write, like plot and pacing and world building. Like you can see her develop throughout the series, and then because of that we get Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares, my all-time favorite books of all time. Have I told you I really like these books? I really like these books. The next book I read in February was Lighter Than My Shadow by Katy Green, which was a graphic novel about a girl who, it sort of follows her eating disorder journey and her path into healing, and sort of how her eating disorder changed from anorexia into like binge eating as she got older. And I personally found this book really deeply meaningful. I've been pretty open about my history with my eating disorder struggles, and I did move also from more restrictive to binge eating as I got older, and there were a lot of things that happened in this book that felt like I could have, like a lot of the stuff about body image, like things I could have verbatim said when I was like 15 kind of stuff. I will say this book deals with some very heavy subject matter. Obviously it's about eating disorders, and there's also sexual assault in there, which is, it's pretty like explicit about what happens, and it was very like it made my stomach turn, but it's a very like, it's necessary, like it's not gratuitous, it was just a very impactful, meaningful, well-written book, and I gave that a 5 stars. The next book I read was an arc of Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, who is an Ohio author. She lives in Cincinnati, and she also went to my alma mater, Miami University, so I feel like I have to love her books because, like, love and honor. But I really liked this, not as much as An Enchantment of Ravens, which was just such a fast, easy fantasy read. I loved the world building. I liked the relationship. I liked everything about, I actually want to go back and reread it now that I'm reading more fantasy to like see if I like it as much as I remember liking it, because I remember reading it and being like, this is the greatest book of all time, but now that I read way more than I did 4 years ago or 3 years ago whenever it came out, I'm wondering how I'd feel. So I gave this like between a 3.5 and a 4, and I rounded it up to 4 stars on Goodreads. The beginning was really slow, and I had trouble getting into the world and understanding what was going on. But as it picks up, like the pace picks up as the book goes on. So basically we follow Elizabeth, who has been brought up in this magical library, and they are like sort of wardens for these magical books that sort of have powers, and there's different like danger levels of these books, and they can kind of transform, like the more dangerous ones can like transform into these like demon sort of things. But the books are used by what are they called? Is it wizards? What's the word? Sorcerers, something. I can't remember, like, the word that's used. But basically, it gave me, like, vibes. Like, there's the relationship between Nathaniel and Silas, who is, like, his demon buddy, who, like, gives him his, like, wizardy powers. Reminded me a lot of Calcifer and Howl in Howl's Moving Castle. So, like, it was giving me Howl's Moving Castle vibes a little bit. There's, like, a magic library. Elizabeth is actually, like, a strong female character. I feel like in a lot of fantasy books, they'll, like, at the beginning, they'll be like, she's a strong female character. And then, like, on chapter 4, like, she completely, like, loses her shit and quakes in her boots and then spends the whole rest of the book moping around waiting for a man to save her. Elizabeth is just, like, a very strong character all the way through the books. And then I feel like Nathaniel, like, they bring out the best in each other, and the book moved the fastest for me while Elizabeth and Nathaniel were on page together. Their chemistry was great. I really liked their dialogue back and forth. I really liked that. So if you are a fantasy fan, I would recommend picking it up. It's a standalone read, which is always nice to read a fantasy that doesn't involve, like, 2,000 pages. So yeah, it was just a fun, like, plus there's magic libraries. Like, what isn't to like about magic libraries? The next book I read was the Giver graphic novel, which I love The Giver. It's probably one of my favorite middle grade novels. I feel like it's so darkly disturbing in its portrayal. I feel like it's one of the best dystopian novels I've ever read, and I've read a lot of dystopian novels. It's still, from when I read it the first time when I was in, like, 4th grade or whatever, still, I think, is consistently one of the best dystopian tales that I've ever read. And there's just some, like, really insidious, dark, I forget how dark it is. So the graphic novel is a really faithful, what's the word I'm looking for? Adaptation of the book. And the pictures start out in mostly, like, it's not black and white, it's sort of like blue and white, but it's without it being, you know, harsh black and white, whatever. It's this very, like, blue-gray color and white, and then as Jonas develops, like, the sight for color, more and more color starts coming in to the book, and then by the end, it's in all color, and it was just beautiful. And if you're a fan of The Giver, check out the graphic novel. It'll take you, like, an hour or two to get through, and I read it all in one sitting. It was beautiful, and it just made me remember why I love The Giver so much. And then the next book I read, actually in the same night, was Bloom by Kevin Panetta, which is, actually the whole, and this book is all shades of, like, teal aqua, which is my favorite color, so I liked it. And this is, like, a coming-of-age story about a boy whose family owns a bakery, and he wants to leave and go to college, or no, he wants to move with his band to another city and try to, like, get his band off the ground. And his dad is like, no, you need to stay here and work in the bakery, the family bakery, and, like, you don't have options. Like, you have to do this. And another boy is hired for the summer to work in the bakery, and the two boys end up developing a friendship that kind of turns into something more, and it's just really, like, it was just really cute. And the characters are definitely flawed characters. They're not perfect people, but there's a lot of growth and development, and there's a lot of baking, which I love baking. What's not to like about it? It was just a cute read, and I gave that a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was also a graphic novel. I read a lot of graphic novels in February, which is why my book number was so high, was Check Please by I'm not even going to try to pronounce her name because I'm going to butcher it. But it was a really cute graphic novel about a gay hockey player, and he is he's attending a very preppy school. It's, like, sort of like an Ivy League type preppy school. And I really liked it because Miami University has a really strong hockey program, and we were actually the university with the first openly gay, like, team member, slash team manager, and I saw, like, Brendan Burke's legacy in this, which other people might not have seen, but he, like, hockey has not traditionally been very open about, gay players, and so I was like, this is awesome. Like, I really liked that part. The one thing I will say is I would definitely recommend this more for older teens. It takes place in college, and it's like kind of like almost like new adult. So there's a lot of vulgarity, and plus I don't feel like it would really interest like middle schoolers or like younger teens as much. Like, I could recommend it to like a 17-year-old or like someone through college, but the whole thing takes place in basically like a frat house where all of the hockey players live. It's all guys, they're all foul-mouthed. That's my sense of humor. I kind of loved it, so I'm excited there's going to be more. I'm excited to see what else is coming in these adventures of these hockey players. Then the next book I read, which I was going to do a whole video on and I don't think I'm going to anymore, is Blood Heir by Amelie Wenzhou. And I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4-star review. The beginning was very slow, but it picked up a lot, especially in the back half. This book really isn't problematic. There was a lot of Twitter. The author has pulled the book from publication for now. I'm really hoping that she re-releases it because I'm really interested and intrigued to see where the story is going to go, but there were accusations that this book was anti-black, that this book was racist. I read the book. I intentionally went through and highlighted every single time one of the 3 main characters' physical appearance was described, and people were saying there was like a little black girl who died for the white main character, and the only thing that's problematic is that the publisher put like a white gray girl on the cover because the main character is not described as white. She's described as having fawn, tawny skin. It says she has the same deep skin as her mother, and then her mother is described as having deep russet skin later on in the book, so if she has the same skin as her mother, she's pretty dark-skinned. She's described as having very dark features. Her dad has paler, lighter features, and then her parents are from different kingdoms, or different parts of the kingdom. They're different. Her parents are definitely described as different ethnicities. But she shares her mother's dark features. And then the little girl, who I really only think people were picturing her as black because of the scene where she dies, is a little reminiscent of Rue dying in Hunger Games. It's not like an exact thing, but like there's like elements, so I feel like people read that and then had that mental image from the movie of like Katniss over Rue. The little girl is described as tan with very bright blue eyes. Like, that was one of the most annoying things about the first half of the book, was how often this girl's ocean blue eyes, turquoise blue eyes, shining blue eyes were mentioned. It was exhausting. Like, I think it was mentioned 5 times in the 4 pages before she dies. Which I'm only saying that this girl dies, May dies, because that was the point of contention that people were losing their minds over on Twitter. And it's also, so like, and she also has shiny, curly hair that like repeatedly is showing like the main character like running her hands through, like May's curls, like you can easily run hands through it. It doesn't sound like textured like black hair. She sounds like a tan, blue-eyed girl, like Mediterranean, or like a white girl who just is tan. Like, you don't, I don't know, it's just, the main character's skin is described as darker than the little girl's skin. So it's not, the little girl's not described as black in any way, shape, or form. And then the other accusation was that this book is racist because it's using slavery, like saying that like people should be enslaved or something, which it's not. And this book is not a commentary on North American slavery. This book is a commentary on modern day human trafficking and forced labor in East Asia. And before, people are like, oh, well, you're writing this book to North Americans, so you need to write this was like another thing I saw, which I thought was utterly ridiculous. Like, this, you need to remember you're writing this to North Americans and that's going to be their lens. Like, a huge proportion of those, like, people who are trafficked out of East Asia end up in North America. So it is our problem. And there's nothing wrong with writing about, this is a huge global issue. I looked at the UN's stats, and I think it was like at any given point in time, 11.7 million East Asians are being trafficked or in forced labor, which is insane. Like, that is a huge number of people. That is a problem that we should all care about. It disproportionately affects East Asians. The author is Chinese, so she's writing what she knows. She's writing about problems that are important to her and that are things she's seen and what she knows, and I don't think there's anything problematic with that. And bad things are allowed to happen, and why, like, just because there's slavery in the book does not mean the book is endorsing slavery. That would be like saying The Handmaid's Tale is endorsing a patriarchal theocracy, which is, that's the opposite. Like, it's showing that thing to show how bad it is. So yeah, and like the words used in the book are like trafficking. It's not like legal slavery. It's all back alley, like underground kind of slavery. It's technically illegal. And there's like shady businessmen who like traffic people with powers, in like the slavery underground sort of thing, human trafficking underground. There's a lot of forced labor, where people are like tricked into signing contracts and then they're like trapped. And okay, so my camera cut off while I was ranting about Blood Heir. But basically the moral of the story is this book is not problematic, and I really liked where the ending left off, and I'm really excited to find out what happens to these characters. And so I really hope she does end up publishing this book, because I really want to find out what happens. It just, at the end, it felt like the main character was really coming into her own and like grappling with the morality of using her powers versus not using her powers and reclaiming her throne. And I'm interested to see how that happens, and I feel like you could see the writing develop throughout the book, and it was much stronger in the second half, and I feel like there's a really good core of a story there, and I'm excited to find out what happens next. So I really hope these books do end up getting published, because there was nothing wrong with them. Oh, and then the next book I read in February was Night of Cake and Puppets, which is a novella that takes place in the Daughter of Smoke and Bone world. This takes place, I think, between book 1 and book 2, but it's Mick and Susanna's, how they like go on their first date sort of thing, and it was just really adorable, really cute. Like I said, Mick and Susanna were my favorite characters in the series, and they were like the comic relief, and they were just amazing, amazing characters. I flew through it. I read this all in one sitting, and yeah, it's worth the read if you are in that universe. It's cute and happy, and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was Enchantee by Gita Trellis, which was I finally got a fantasy novel that I liked, set in Paris. I've read so many bummers of books that are fantasy novels set in Paris, and this one finally delivered on what I wanted. It's a historical fantasy that is set in, like right at the beginning stages of the French Revolution. It's just really, I feel like most of the magic in this is how the world is portrayed. There are fantastical elements. The main character, who's, I can never remember names of characters, Camille. So Camille she has magic. She has like the ability to change small objects into coins, which she uses to buy things, like to feed and provide for her sister, her younger sister, and her older brother. And then her older brother is like a gambler and a drunkard, and he gets himself into trouble, and Camille and her sister have to like fend for themselves. And so Camille uses a magical dress that she had inherited from her mother, and this dress transforms her into a member of the nobility, and she is able to go to Versailles and sort of partake in the revelries that are going on at Versailles. So you get this sort of counter, like she's living in poverty, but she's spending huge chunks of her time as a noble person in Versailles, and like the decadence and like the lavish lifestyle, and you sort of see like Versailles has been propped up by magic and the magic is failing, and it sort of is like this allusion to the rotting underbelly of the French nobility, and it's really historical. Like there are, like I said, those fantastical elements like the dress, but most of this is a historical fiction novel, and it was just really magical. I got the feeling, like, when I was reading about Versailles, that, like, the author did so much research. Like, I don't doubt that every hallway, every doorway, every room that is discussed in the book actually exists. I was pulling up pictures of things mentioned in Versailles as I was reading it. It was just incredibly, like, the world building was so, like, I really felt like I was walking the halls of Versailles as I was reading this book. I've never been to Versailles, but I was like all the different like parts of the garden and the different like palaces, because Versailles isn't just like the one big building that everyone thinks of. There's like the gardens, and then there's other like houses and palaces behind Versailles. I didn't realize like how expansive it was. Like I said, I've never been there, and it was just really, really cool. I gave this, I think, 3.75 out of 5 stars. Yeah, 3.75. I rounded it up to 4 stars on Goodreads. There were parts that were a little slow moving, but I really, really enjoyed the parts that happened, especially in Versailles, and there's hot air balloons, and there's cute boys, and I was just really excited to finally get a decent fantasy novel set in Paris. That's all I wanted out of 2019. Because Gilded Wolves did not give that to me. And then that is everything. Wow, that is everything I read in February. Oh boy. I feel like this is going to be the longest, like, what I read in a month book of all time. But, you know, this is why I had to do this book, this thing face to face instead of over a video of me doing my monthly spread, because I read a whole lot in February, and it's now April 2nd, so I put off doing this video for quite a while, and now I'm gonna have to go do my March one, so you might see me in the same outfit, because I'm not cool enough to go change my clothes to film another video. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll have my Goodreads linked down below so that you can check out all of the books that I read in February. You can check out what I'm reading right now, everything that I've read, my reviews and ratings for all of those books. And yeah, so thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you in my next video. Bye!